Hello everybody, welcome back. I just finished my travel sketchbook yesterday, so today I want to show you what's inside. I made the sketchbook by myself in an earlier video, so take a look at that if you want to make one yourself. It held up pretty well throughout the trip, but it's starting to look a bit beat up because it followed me everywhere I went. I always had it with me in my backpack. The first page here, it was a few days before my trip, and I wanted to break into the sketchbook with a quick live drawing session. So I painted these shiitake mushrooms before eating them. And then I painted this road scene just to kind of try out the paper and get used to the format. I'm not super happy with this composition. I think I should have made the clouds a bit more dramatic, but that was a decision I wasn't able to make a few months back. The left side of the spread was also painted before the departure. I was trying to decide what watercolor paints to bring with me. I ended up bringing Opera Rose. It's not a color that I usually reach for, but for summer flowers, I feel like I'm going to need all the vibrancy I can get. On the right side, this was on the day of departure. It happened to be a marathon on the bridge from Sweden to Denmark, so we had to wait for hours for the traffic to get back to normal. So we went to a nearby town and saw this beautiful field with poppies on the side. I went to pick the flowers and painted them in the car. I did get bitten by a tick when picking those flowers, so be careful guys, always check your legs when you walk around tall grass. That was not fun. This one down here is the next day when we arrived at the safari. We were there before it opened, so I had an hour to paint this little landscape and also the actual gate. The day after that, we were at Amsterdam and I painted this little marketplace. There were so many other things I wanted to paint there. It's such a beautiful, beautiful city, but I was just too preoccupied with all the other activities. And then we were back on the road again. These are some flowers I picked in Belgium. It was some random places where we took a break. This one is painted in gouache. It was a very pleasant night drive. I think it was around 10 in the evening, and I wanted to capture the moment before the sunset was completely gone. The next day we arrived in France. Of course, the first thing I did was to go to a bakery. And I really loved how they used the baguette paper as a place for advertisement for the local discounts. So I thought that was kind of unusual. Here is a village where we're staying at. I can't remember the name of the place right now. Sadly, I couldn't go swim in that beautiful ocean because I had my period and was cramping. I was exhausted too, so I just stayed in the car and painted this from the parking lot. Might have something to do with the weather too. It was very sunny, very hot and humid. As you can see, the paper wasn't drying as quickly as it normally does. So this page turned out to be a bit softer than I intended. The next day, or maybe it was 2 days later, we arrived at Valais. This is a really pretty medieval town, and I painted the church there. I like how these cars in the picture show in scale how massive and majestic that building is. Moving on, we were driving towards the ocean again, mostly to avoid the heat. I used to be able to handle the heat much better, but now I despise it. So this was painted when we were taking a break in a shady path. And this was the actual drive. I noticed the cast shadow tend to look very dark on these blazing summer days, so I experimented with that effect. The next day I was painting with my dry gouache palette again. I wasn't super satisfied. I remember I was in a bad mood for some reason. I didn't want to go swim because there were so many bugs. I guess I was just tired. So I didn't bother to paint with colors for these ink sketches. These are just some random items that I picked at the beach, but I think they actually look quite nice as they are. The next day was again a very humid day. The paper didn't want to dry, and I have never experienced this kind of climate in Sweden. It felt almost like inhaling warm misted water. I know that sounds a bit gross, but it wasn't that bad. It was just a lot harder to predict how wet the paper was, so I couldn't get the look I wanted. I'm mostly unhappy about how I placed this band of flags. I feel like they look so stiff when they're almost perfectly horizontal like that. And this is also the only painting, I think, where I used the Caran d'Ache Neocolor II crayons to add some extra colors. One of these days, I think I lost the date stamp in the car, so I don't exactly remember which days I painted these. We were passing by these towns when the weather started to cool down a bit, and I thought those views are quite uniquely French. After that, we reached another beach. This time we left the Normandy part of France and came to the Brittany region. I had a great time here, swimming and hanging around at the beach. This sketch here was the first time I attempted to paint from memory. It's a view where I was looking back at the beach while standing in the water. So obviously I couldn't bring my sketchbook into the ocean to paint there, but I tried very hard to remember the value and color temperature of each section of what I was looking at standing in there. And then I painted this once I came back to the campsite. I think we stayed at this beach for at least 3 days. The last day I painted with oil before the sky was cleared. It was a very strange, misty and dark morning. It felt almost a bit scary actually. And the Valley sketch here is kind of a failed experiment. It was done in the car when we're driving through different towns. I remember when we were going downhill, I could see the faraway mountains and houses, but I couldn't remember clearly enough to paint it, so that was that. Now we're back in Falaise. It was probably my favorite place to be. I painted the castle there, and the next page, it's the same place, but I was facing a different direction. I usually don't leave the sky completely blank like this, but because we stayed there for many days, I was looking at these houses under many different lighting. The camera doesn't really capture how it felt like to be there. In that particular morning, the sky did look so pale, almost like pure blank, so I decided to leave it that way. This one was from another nearby medieval town. There was a thunderstorm when we got there, so this one was painted with a photo reference. This was a very challenging perspective for me. I don't think I'm very familiar with this angle. But it was inspired by some art I saw in Pont-Aven a few days before this. Otherwise, I might not have had the courage to paint a complex scene like this. From here on, everything was painted after I got back home. There were so many things I wanted to paint, and I got a bit overwhelmed when I was there. So this is when we tried the snails with parsley butter. The texture was very similar to oyster, but the flavor is more like mushroom. It was a bit scary at the beginning, but it was quite good actually. This was one of the fountains in Falaise where they turned into a flower container. I thought the lighting, the cast shadows were quite interesting. The next spread is for my most important oil painting supplies, like safflower oil, rags, and brush cleaner, palette knives. And of course, wipes and trash bags, very important. I think it would be quite cool in the future to look back and see how my supplies evolve. The next page, this sculpture was inspired by Jess Karp's sketchbook tour. I remember how much I wanted to be able to paint like her when I saw her sculpture paintings. So I knew that I had to dedicate at least one spread on the sketchbook to paint a sculpture. The sculpture itself was found in this castle. I think it was Napoleon III when he rebuilt it. It was somewhat damaged, like her face and her left shoulder, but I just loved the lighting. I think it made her really regal and beautiful, and I'm quite happy with how this one turned out. The castle is called Pierrefonds, and I made the sky quite flat because both the midground and the foreground is quite busy already, so I wanted the sky to be more airy. Same with this next painting. I didn't want the sky to compete for attention because the focal point is around the house and the grass. This is where I started to experiment with negative shapes. Like these bushes here, the bottom part is hidden behind the field, so I tried to use the darker green to carve out the shapes of those fuzzy grass. Same with the windows here, they're very dark in value but partially blocked by the grass. So that was a new technique I tried. The last picture is on the way back home to Sweden. On that drive, I noticed how different the Swedish sky felt. It's like the very dark clouds and the very bright clouds, they can kind of coexist. That's something I used to take for granted. I never realized how special that felt. Maybe it's not that uncommon, but I meant in a picturesque kind of sense. The focal point is the clouds here. I actually wish I made the houses smaller, but I left the foreground completely untouched because I don't want the viewer to pay too much attention to them. So yeah, that is all for this video. I hope you enjoyed this sketchbook tour, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye!